I joined Devon and Cornwall Police in 1971. I was about 22 years of age. I joined because I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to be involved within the community, policing by consent. It was only later when the words of pursuit of justice, of rehabilitation of offenders, of bringing empowerment to victims, closure, and things of that nature actually registered fully in my mind and consciousness. And all the while I was seeking these pursuits, I wanted to administer my duties with compassion and fairness and be treated or treat people as I would like to have been treated myself. Every organisation that one joins has, or employment for that matter, has sometimes initiation practices, for lack of better words. They're pranks which are carried out. And when I joined the police and was posted down to Plymouth, I worked on a night duty. It was my first tour of duty, and I was told at the briefing that I would be working with another senior officer and that we would be going to a graveyard in the early hours of the morning to see if we could detect people who were supposedly conducting devil worship activities in the graveyard. Never having confronted this before, I thought this was going to be quite a challenge. But anyway, at about 3 o'clock in a moonlit morning, when everything was as still and silent, we entered the graveyard, climbing the wall. As we went into the grounds of this large graveyard, I suddenly heard banging like a drum or something similar. We moved closer, and then my colleague suggested that I went one way and he went the other. He disappeared completely, and I moved forward gingerly, trying not to step on the gravel, which was like cannonballs or whatever going off, exploding underneath my feet. Suddenly, without warning, a dustbin lid was thrown at me and landed at my feet, and 3 or 4 characters scurried behind some of the larger gravestones. I called to my colleague, of course, who did not appear. And so, being on my own and fearing a little bit at this time for my personal welfare, I drew my nightstick and advanced slowly forward. After a few minutes, I saw another dark shadow, and far from retreating, this particular apparition advanced slowly towards me, and all I could see was a cloak with a dark set of piercing eyes looking at me. I raised my nightstick, and with the same, this figure ran towards me, screaming like a banshee, and then threw the cloak open, and I could see the face, which I immediately identified as one of the section who I had paraded with at the beginning of the tour. And then from behind the wall of the cemetery, which was not a million miles away, appeared another 7 or 8 faces of the rest of the section, who were splitting themselves with laughter. Needless to say, I was not an amused character, and a few expletives came forward. But it was quite an initiation service into Devon and Cornwall Police at Plymouth. Different officers who joined the force had different initiation ceremonies, and whilst I was not personally present, I remember one where in actual fact a police officer on patrol had been sent down to the clock tower to investigate the report of a horseman who was causing a bit of problem and out of control in the vicinity of the clock tower and Exeter College. This would have been about 1974.
So it's normal for horse riders to just ride on the streets then?
At 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, probably not. Anyway, this officer went along to this location and reported back that he could see nothing. And then, as he was standing beside the statue of Buller, General Buller, on his horse, he realised what the situation was. Needless to say, he saw the joke, but another little thing which in actual fact was innocent, but just brought an individual into the organisation's folds and comfort. There are many reasons why people find themselves involved in criminal activity. Some of them do it purely for greed and self-interest. Some of them do it because of circumstance. And whilst crime is not generally, or the commission of crime is not generally excusable, there are very often attendant circumstances which we must take into consideration, and which I've always sought to do. And so when I think of the word compassion, I again think of how best can we deal with this situation, not only for the victim, but also for the offender as well. And I'll give you an example in respect of this, which sticks in my mind, where I went to an address where a young man and his wife and 3 or 4 children lived. And this young man, aged about 30, had been involved with criminal activity in the past. And he had reported that his electricity meter had been broken into and that a few £100 worth of cash had been stolen from it. I immediately suspected that he was responsible for the theft, although he denied it. But what I discovered during the course of the investigation was that his wife was in fact dying of cancer. And I was quite touched by this. And in some small way I took round certain items of food and so forth to the house for the benefit of the family. 2 weeks after I had done this, the husband turned up at the police station and made a full admission to the theft of the monies involved. Now normally he would have been prosecuted because theft is theft. But I made representations to the superintendent who would make the final decision on this, and a decision was made to caution him and not to take this before the court. Sadly, the man's wife died, but he himself has never since that time, to my knowledge, ever come to the attention of police for any criminal activity. Compassion? Yes, I think so. But justice also? Yes, both together. There's one incident which I think is worthy of mention because it talks about domestic violence, and it also talks about the role of young people who basically are caught up in this very often. And I had to go to a house many years ago when I worked on the Burnthouse Lane estate where there was a report of an assault. And when I got there, the wife had a black eye, and suddenly the husband, who had undoubtedly been responsible, appeared from the bathroom, having had a bath since the event, and initially queried what I was saying. What became very much and readily apparent was that it wasn't the wife who had phoned the police, but the couple's 8-year-old daughter. And she'd done so as a result of input she'd received at her local school with regard to domestic violence issues. When her father became aware that it was the daughter who had informed the police, he just could not get his mind around it. I didn't make an arrest at that time, but the father asked to be removed from the home and went to stay with his mother overnight. On the journey, he said to me, when my mother and father had arguments, my father would regularly hit my mother, who would go to bed crying, and in the morning would wake up and all would be well. And here my daughter is reporting the same sort of incident involving me and my wife to the police. Very courageous young lady. 3 months later, I saw the wife, and she said that her husband's behaviour, particularly in respect of domestic violence, had totally changed, and the dynamics within the household were also completely different. All of this because of the conduct of this brave little girl. And so, without a prosecution, one was able to bring empowerment and perhaps to some extent a little bit of closure in respect of the conduct which we all accept is totally unacceptable. One of the saddest memories that I have, which was a fatality, occurred very early in my service and involved a young boy about 18 years of age who had been employed as a weekend forecourt attendant at a petrol station in Cowley Bridge Road. And a cat had been run over in the road, and the boy wanted to remove the cat. And thinking that the road was clear, he stepped into the road when he saw that a car was indicating to pull into the forecourt. But he hadn't been aware that there was a car accelerating up very closely behind. The end result was that the car which was following took the young man down the road about 100 yards on its bonnet and windscreen, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. There's an ironic twist to what happened though, because when a post-mortem was conducted subsequently, it was found that the young man had terribly diseased kidneys, and quite possibly he would have died within 2 or 3 years of that time had he not been restricted very much to dialysis. But it's never nice to go to the scene of a death, an unexpected death, involving a young person, and it's perhaps even worse relaying that information to the parents of the young person concerned. There was one incident which comes to mind which is perhaps slightly different because the generations were older, but I got a call to a house where the children of a man and wife were at the scene of their parents' house, and the wife or the mother had died. And when I got there, it became immediately apparent that the father was hyperventilating and really struggling to breathe properly. And I requested an ambulance, but sadly they were all committed. And while we did the best we could, on that particular occasion I ended up dealing with 2 sudden deaths in the space of a half an hour. And so the children, adult though they were, had lost both parents in that one moment. And that left me feeling very sad.